Hey there guys, thank you for taking the time to watch this short presentation. This presentation is on a concept called the agency theory. And the agency theory tends to exist within organisations that are listed on the stock exchange. And the reason I say that is because the agency primarily relates to the relationship between shareholders and the directors of that organisation. And it can cause a certain amount of mistrust and a certain amount of misunderstanding. And as a consequence of that, it needs to be rectified quickly and effectively. Now, the purpose of this session is for me to explain the basis of the agency theory, for me to discuss the consequences of any problems on the back of the agency theory if they've not been rectified, and then identify how it can be resolved. And to do so, I'm going to go through a diagram. So, the starting point within the agency theory is the shareholders. So imagine you have a company and the shareholders purchase shares in that company. The reason they purchase shares in that company is because they want a voting right, but then they also want a return. In effect, the shareholders now own that organisation. But quite a lot of shareholders that purchase shares in companies do not actually work for the company. They don't have the inclination, they don't have the time, they don't have the knowledge to run the company. And what they will do, they being shareholders, they will appoint directors on their behalf to run the company for them. Now, the directors sit at board level and the directors make decisions on behalf of shareholders to run the company, I suppose, in the best way that suits the shareholders' interests. And we characterise that by saying that the directors have a duty of stewardship. Now, a stewardship is a stabling term. Stewardship, or the term steward means, or originally meant looking after horses. But in the context of the agency theory, and in the context of directors and shareholders and companies, stewardship actually means the protection of the assets. So if you break it down, the directors protect the assets of the shareholders, the assets being the company. And the way in which they protect the assets of the shareholders is they make decisions for the best of the company. They make decisions for the best of the shareholders, and on the back of that, hopefully the company will run in an effective way and make loads of profit and make loads of return. But because the shareholders do not work within the organisation, because the shareholders do not work directly with directors, there is this what we call distance of separation. Now, this distance of separation creates this knowledge gap, and shareholders basically don't know what's happening within the organisation on a day-to-day basis. They don't necessarily know what's happening with the organisation from a strategic and long-term basis. And this is where this level of mistrust and misunderstanding comes from that I initially mentioned. And this level of mistrust and misunderstanding can cause problems long-term. It can cause problems for decision-making and strategic perspective. And it can damage the relationship between shareholders and directors. So it's really important that this is resolved. This knowledge gap is resolved. Now, this knowledge gap is the basis of the agency theory. Okay? And what directors try and do is they try and inform shareholders on a regular basis, an annual basis, by producing financial statements. And financial statements are produced by organisations on an annual basis within an annual report, and they are effectively published and laid in front of shareholders for their approval. Now, because shareholders don't necessarily have the inclination, they don't necessarily have the knowledge, the experience, when it comes to them reading the financial statements, they have quite a big question, because they're not quite sure whether the financial statements are truthful, whether the financial statements are correct. And it's not the case that they don't believe the directors, but because of this knowledge gap, there's always a level of uncertainty. So what the shareholders will do is they need to put a solution in place in order to resolve this, this knowledge gap and this agency theory, because otherwise this situation will continue and get progressively worse. So what shareholders will do is they will appoint an external auditor. Now, an external auditor sits from outside the organisation, and they are effectively an independent body. And the shareholders will appoint the external auditors to check the financial statements. Now, I'm simplifying the process by saying check the financial statements. It is a very complicated and a very long-winded process, but at the end of the day, what they are doing is they are providing reassurance to shareholders that the financial statements are correct, that the financial statements are truthful and fair. And they will report that back to the shareholders saying yes they do or no they don't. Now, the term agency theory comes from the fact that shareholders who appoint external auditors do so on the knowledge that the external auditors are agents. Anybody that's been appointed by shareholders are agents. And in the context of this particular diagram, the agents are the external auditors. The agency theory relates to the external auditors, and the external auditors effectively resolve that knowledge gap. So hopefully, guys, that explains the agency theory to you. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.